We have talked a lot about the white nationalist movement and what it is, and we wanted to bring you an extraordinary story that I'm hoping is ready to go, of an FBI agent who lived undercover for many years and saved many lives in that process. And so, if we can, are we? No? Yes? Yes. Come on out. So, we have an extraordinary journalist with us, Michelle Shepard, who is going to have a conversation with the FBI agent who showed such enormous courage and dedication. And I had the privilege of meeting his wife last night and having dinner with her. And I presume she's here, and I just want to do a shout out to her, because many times the wives who send their husbands in law enforcement into these situations without knowing what's going to come of it takes a kind of bravery all its own. So to her and to all of the other spouses of law enforcement officers who may be listening to this, our gratitude and our respect for the sacrifices that you make. And with that, let me turn this over to Michelle and Scott, and take it away.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much. And it's really an honor to be here today and join you, and especially humbling coming after the panel that we just did. We were also supposed to be joined today by a wonderful writer for Rolling Stone, Paul Solitaroff, and unfortunately he couldn't join us. But if you haven't heard Scott's story, I encourage you to look up his piece of The Undercover Nazi. And Paul is a beautiful writer. And I'm going to embarrass Scott right now by reading a couple of quotes from his magazine piece. Scott was one of the most storied agents since Joe Pistone, the real-life Donnie Brasco. This is a quote I think you especially don't like. Let's keep my distance over here. He's been lifting all his life, has the setup to prove it, mailbox quads and meat plow arms that dispose him to sleeveless tees. My other favorite quote, and I promise I'll stop after this, Scott. He's funny and profane and could charm a lampshade off its base with his whiskey sour drawl and Harley swagger. So that article was the first time that Scott went public after more than 2 decades undercover with the FBI. Over the years, he infiltrated outlaw motorcycle group. He went undercover with the Klan, was involved as a case agent with pill mills, and most recently infiltrated and essentially dismantled the group, the neo-Nazi accelerationist group, the Base. So I think this hour will go very quickly. I joke that this was the easiest interview ever because I just got to say, hey, Scott, and off he goes. But while he does teach law enforcement now, this is really his first sort of public conversation on some of the remarkable stories that he had. So, Scott, maybe we could start with, you have such a unique perspective, all the different voices that we have coming here today, but yours is truly unique after so many years. But let's start first with your most recent case, big case, which was the Base. How is that different from the other cases that you had over the past 2 decades?
So I told somebody backstage, because he said he couldn't hear, so I told him the line. I'd been doing undercover work since 1996. I was a real cop first at Greenville County Sheriff's Office in South Carolina. But I became a vice and narcotics investigator, so I'm doing street level undercover. I get in the FBI, I get in the undercover program. So from 1996 until, December 31st of last year, really. But for the purposes of what I said about the Base, November, after the Halloween weekend of 2019, I came back to the office and I said, man, I've been undercover since 1996, off and on, working all kinds of stuff. I said, I have never had to burn Bibles. I have never had to burn American flags. And I damn sure wasn't with a group of people that went and stole a goat off a farm, sacrificed it at a pagan ritual, and we drank its blood. And I said, I did all that in 3 days with these guys. So I think they need to go to jail. We just got to figure out why.
And we'll get to the fact that they did, thankfully, and also that Halloween night that you speak of, and the poor goat named Gar that we'll also speak about.
Yeah.
But first, maybe you could take us back to, what are your first steps in infiltrating a group like this? How do you start?
Well, cases can start differently, but we had intelligence of a guy named Nazaro. We had intelligence of somebody going by the moniker of TMB, which is the Militant Buddhist online Gab, maybe some Discord, Telegram, just really over the top spewing stuff, which generally, if you spew that much crazy stuff, the other people in the group say you're glowing because they think you're doing Fed talk, which is what they consider you're going to bring the feds down on us because you're talking so crazy.
So not that they're suspecting that person of being a Fed themselves, just that they're so out there that you're going to get the heat now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we had intelligence about the group. We have world working partners without giving away anything classified. I mean, there's people here on the last panel. There's people from across the pond and everywhere. So, online, the world is small. They may find themselves in a group and they go, hey, we're in this group. We got an operative in the group and they're talking all kinds of trash, but we're figuring out that most of them are in the United States or it's being run out of the United States. So that comes to us. We start working it. And the long and short of it was I agreed to go in and try to bump them. And the intelligence was they were on Gab, so I created a Gab account. I couldn't just show up on Gab and out of nowhere. So I had to get kicked off of Facebook, which they referred to as Jewbook, and that was my thing. Hey, why are you here? I got kicked off of Jewbook, and I post the thing showing I got kicked off. So that gives me some kind of credibility on why I just showed up out of nowhere. Started following stuff. There's all kinds of crazy stuff on Gab, and then I started commenting and on the basis stuff, and then they had an email, a Proton Mail account to email, and I just went in cold. I just said, hey, I'm really liking what I'm seeing. I'm kind of interested. And then for a whole week, I was getting all kinds of questions and what's your background and what's your story, what's your when did you get radicalized, basically? What was your red pill? When were you red pilled? Which is, off of the Matrix. So in the white supremacy world or the extremism world that I was privy to because of my skill set. If they say, when did you get red pilled? If you remember the movie, Nemo decides to take the red pill because the red pill will let him see the truth for everything. If you take the blue pill, then you just stay oblivious. So it's almost like being baptized, being radicalized. You got to know how. So I answered all those questions, and then that led to them instructing me to download the Wire app, and I did probably about an hour and 15-minute phone call with approximately 5 base members to include Nazaro, the leader, and it was a panel interview for about an hour and 15 minutes.
Wow. And how do you prepare for something like that?
Well, I started putting together my backstory because in Undercover, that's what it's really all about, how you set yourself up and you set yourself up for success. I had worked with some sources that were skinheads, but they're now bikers. So I called them and I said, look, you can get credit. Can you help me? I want to understand everything there is about the skinheads in South Carolina. How did he do it? And that I just copied. And then I rehearsed it back with him and he said, yeah, that's perfect. So that's how I kind of did it. I created all that and then I
And then you were in.
Yeah,
So tell me that you mentioned the name Nazaro, and for those here that aren't familiar with that name, Ronaldo Nazaro, who went by the moniker of Roman Wolf and Norman Spear, I believe as well, was the quote-unquote founder of the base.
Yes.
Tell me about your call with him and what you can about him, or what you knew at the time about him, I guess, because this was pretty early days. There wasn't that much known about the base.
Yeah, I knew that he had been posting pretty radical. And then some people in the base got doxxed. And then he starts pulling back, a little less radical. Now he's the smart, cocky guy. And I'm not saying anything that's not out there. This case is, for the people we took down, is adjudicated. There are tons of articles. Your podcast, you interviewed him. So Nazaro is an American citizen who resides in Russia. And what he did is he starts explaining to me what the base is. And he explained what accelerationism was. And you know, they're big on siege. James Mason, kind of like your second father of the acceleration movement. Louis Beam was your first, and then it kind of died out for a while. And it was kind of cringe for people in the white nationalism section to be accelerationists unless you were Adam Waffen or, you know, the base. It wasn't a big amount. But they explained to me what accelerationism is, which is not to insult anybody's intelligence. You may have already had it, and I apologize, but their idea is that society cannot be saved through political anything. They don't believe that it can be saved at all, and they believe that society is going to collapse either on its own or through man-made events, and that's where you know, the guerrilla warfare type tactics come in. We're just small hits everywhere to create chaos, whether it's a power station, poisoning water systems, you know, burning up minority-owned stores, stuff like that. And they explained it to me, and I had read Siege a little bit because I knew that was going to be, I knew that was one of the questions that was going to be answered.
Right. Did your homework.
I did my homework, and yeah. So when you get in, that's the whole thing, accelerationism.
Had you heard of this concept of accelerationism before this?
I hadn't, and it was relatively new. I mean, I'm not saying I'm the only one. I'm sure other people knew about it. There's probably people in this room that knew about it, but it just wasn't normal. You know, Christian identity was huge in the beginning of the movement, and that's where they twist the Bible, really twist the Bible into their ideology. And then, you know, you start getting cleaner cut people trying to come in, then you get neo-Nazi 2.0, and then it goes back to just, you know, a National Socialist, neo-Nazi. But then this accelerationism thing came in, which is like, hey, we want to speed it up. We want society to collapse quicker because in their minds, they think they're going to create somewhat of an ethno-state. Not run the entire United States, but just say, for instance, the cell that I was in, one of the Appalachian Mountains. There was another cell that had the Upper Peninsula. There was another cell that had the Pacific Northwest, and the idea was basically to build somewhat of a compound, school your own people, supply your own food, raise your own kids, find women.
I wish we had the land that we could donate to these people so they could go ahead and do this. Yeah. So I'm taking you back to this. You're online. You've passed this. You get through the first hurdle online. Mm-hmm. Then you have your panel with Nazaro and the others. How does that end? So now we're in the early. You still haven't met anybody face to face.
No,
you still haven't done. So where do you go next?
He was actually very cordial. He said, "Now that you know what we're about, and we know what you're about, because they want you to bring something to the table, because they're like they do military-style training, but they're not militia. They're white supremacists. It's two different things, but they're preparing for the boogaloo, right? So I was telling them, hey, I bounced, I did this, hand-to-hand combat, I can do stuff like that. I am a long-time tactical guy, but just so you know, I'm not going in undercover and helping these people get better at their shooting skills, right?
We're going to go back to that because I think that is an important question in terms of, you know, infiltrating and
right.
And entrapment. So we'll go back to that.
So basically, he gives me 24 hours. He said, I'll give you a 24-hour rest period. It'll let us talk about what we think about you, and it'll let you think about whether you really want to be a part of this. And I'll reach out to you tomorrow, and we'll let you know whether we consider you or not, and then you can agree or not. And the next day, they told me they wanted me in the group, and I said, hooray.
So you're in. So then what is that? How do you prepare for that first meeting, or what do they propose for next step?
Well, he says, where are you at? And I said, I'm in the Knoxville area. And he said, well, the closest cell to you is in North Georgia. He said, you'll be contacted by the cell leader. And I don't want to say luck, but it would have it that the cell leader ended up being TMB, the guy who we were trying to figure out who he was anyway.
And so, this is TMB online is the militant Buddhist.
Yeah.
As his moniker.
So then we set up, he's telling me, when can you come to Rome, Georgia and meet us for a face-to-face vetting process? And I'm like, you know, we set it up. I went and met, you want me to go ahead into the case team? Like I drive down there and meet the case team.
I think that's a great story, yeah.
So I go down and I meet the case team that's running the cases out of Atlanta. And I get out of the car Usually my beard's a lot longer, a ponytail, and they're like, "Oh my goodness, man, these guys are gonna, pee their pants when they see you." And I said, "I'm not that guy, man." I said, "Listen," and I say this even when I teach this stuff all over the nation. If I would have showed you a picture of the Columbine kids before they were Columbine kids, what would you have said? If I would have showed you a picture of Dylan Roof before he was Dylan Roof, with his bowl haircut, holding a 45 and a rebel flag and a tank top from Golds that he could not fill out for nothing, what would you say? What would you say if I showed you a picture of the Aurora shooter with orange and yellow hair and everything else? Most likely you're going to say, "Oh, this guy couldn't hurt nobody, this, that, and the other." A lot of people do. Don't ever underestimate. It doesn't matter if they're crazy, it doesn't matter if they're dumb, it doesn't matter if they're missing all the teeth in their head. Dead is dead, and they can pull a trigger. So, anyway, I go to meet, I'll get on a little bit of a podium there.
That's all right.
I go to meet Luke, and ends up being Pestilence. But what they did is they said, "Hey, when you get here, drive, park in this parking lot. There's actually a statue of a Roman wolf, oddly enough, in Rome, Georgia."
You actually can't script this stuff.
I know.
And I'll just tell you, just for a couple of names here, just to keep track of the story. So TMB, online, the militant Buddhist, turns out to be Luke Lane.
Luke Lane.
These are people who have since been arrested and are now serving sentences. Pestilence, online, is
Jacob Caterly.
Jacob Catterley.
So they're like, it's kind of funny because they're telling me, "Park here, take a picture of the Roman wolf, send it to me so I know that you're here." And I'm not making fun of my cover team, but some people on the cover team go, "Do you think they're going to be watching you?" And I go, "Yes, they're watching me. That's why they're telling me to park here and take a picture. What is wrong with you people?" Right? Yeah, just stay here in the graveyard. I'll go take care of it.
Are you nervous at this point? I mean, that's sort of a silly question, but I mean, you've been doing this for 20, but how do you prep yourself up for this, like what you're walking into?
I mean, I don't remember getting like butterflies, but I mean, I'm a musician and a singer. I play on stage all the time. Sometimes I get butterflies, sometimes I don't. I don't go lax and totally be desensitized and like, "Oh, nothing's going to happen." I just know that I've got my story.
Yeah.
I know that when somebody's throwing something at me, it's basically a sport, right? I have no idea what you're throwing at me, but I'm going to catch it and I'm going to throw something back, right? So I've got my whole legend built in my head. So there's a little snafu. We finally meet up, and they come walking up, and I failed to mention one thing. When I met the case team, they said, "Hey, do you mind if we throw a GPS tracker on your truck?" I said, "Nah, go ahead." So they throw it at the back of the truck. Well, I get out to meet Luke and Pestilence, and I know I'm going to get shook down. And they're like, "Hey," I go, "How's it going?" They're like, "Hey, I put your cell phone in airplane mode," and I go, "Okay." And then he pulls out this thing. To me, it looked like a Geiger counter or something. I'd never seen it. I identified it, and we ended up buying one for the Knoxville office, which I used on other cases to wand other people. But this thing picks up everything, and I'm going, as he's wanding me and looking in the truck, I'm going, in my head, I'm like, why would he tell me to cut the cell signal off unless this thing picks up cell, which the GPS tracker is cell. And as he's walking to the back of the truck, it starts beeping, and it starts getting louder and louder, and I'm like, this is probably going to be the quickest undercover meet I've ever done. I said, because he's getting ready to find it. I dropped the right leg back. I was ready to start throwing down if I had to. And as he's getting closer and it's making all kinds of racket, Jacob says, "Do you think it's the power lines?" Because we were on a hill, so where we were at, the power lines were pretty low. And he walked over and it set it all off, and he said, "Yeah." He said, "Man, it's probably the power lines." He said, "Follow us, we'll go somewhere else." Well, from that time, I'm calling the case team and saying, "You need to shut this GPS tracker off." And they're like, "Well, do you think they're going to find it?" I said, "I'm telling you, they almost just found it. I'm telling you, you need to shut this thing off or it's going to be a quick undercover." And they said, "We're not sure if we can get it back on if we shut it off." And I said, "I'm telling you, shut it off."
And you're probably trying to do this with your lips not moving too, because they're in the car in front.
Had the coffee cup. Listen, guys, driving, because I don't know how many people are in town. And then
you can just see them back there like, "Oh, gee, I don't know, Scott."
And then we pull into a abandoned concrete plant, which of course, I'm not preaching, but I look up and I go, "That's funny." I mean, who doesn't come to an empty concrete plant to die in a movie, So they shut it off and I got wanded and I passed. But as I'm getting wanded with my arms up, it just starts pouring rain. And I'm just standing there and the thing is, I don't know, comical.
Once again, you can't script this stuff. I mean, this
No,
true
you
life
can't.
always being stranger than
So yes, I was nervous when that thing was beeping.
you
for
were
sure.
nervous. So now you're basically, you've passed. You're in. This is your first step for infiltrating a group unlike others you have before, even though you've done many of these cases. Tell us where you go next. And if you can, I think it's always dangerous to have one profile for, a base member looks like this. But are there any commonalities of these two and the others that you're going to meet? Are you seeing anything that you're like, okay, this is a problem with this movement. This is the type of person that's being drawn towards it.
Yes, and just to hit on the point of, like, in training, we'll put up a PowerPoint that says, what does a domestic terrorist look like? It's not like you're going to walk in here with a some may, but a 3/4 inch trench coat with a hoodie and all this stuff. But what I learned the more I hung out with the base, a lot of them, you got to remember they're younger. These acceleration groups, whether it's Fourier Krieg Division or there's a Sonnenkrieg Division, there's all kinds of stuff. A lot of them are defunct, and some of those members will move to another group and just change the name. But they really target young kids. Now, there's some older ones in there. I went in as 44 because that's about as young as I could make myself at the time. And I knew Nazara was around 44. We had a couple of 30-year-olds. But as far as the younger ones go, and matter of fact, some of the older ones, the thing that I saw that was kind of like a common bond was broken home, need to belong. Some of them were maybe on the spectrum a little bit, bullied, and no partners. Girlfriend, boyfriend, whichever way you persuade, they had no partners. So, I know I was going to say it later, but for me, I hear of so many great things since I've been here, since we flew in Sunday. But for me, 28 years in law enforcement, do not want to tarnish the badge. All it takes is one, and then everybody thinks everybody's bad. But that's hate, just like there's hate everywhere. It all starts at home, in my opinion, and nobody's proven me wrong yet. If you can, please do. But for me, it all starts at home. At the end of a case, and the father says, "Oh, I thought it was a phase." A Nazi phase?
I'll back you up a bit on that story.
Yeah.
So the reason that we know each other is that I had done a podcast called White Hot Hate, which was about a Canadian journalist who infiltrated this group, the base, and interviewed Luke Lane's father after he had been arrested. And I didn't know Scott at this point. He hadn't gone public, but we knew there was an undercover agent named Scott. And Tom Lane, Luke's father, kind of famously said to me, like, sorry, I'm going to do a southern accent.
Try it.
He said, I knew that Scott. I knew he was either FBI or a pedophile, which was quote. And so, of course, my follow-up question was, and you were okay with this, but it came out in court that he did have very visible a Nazi flag. He had all sorts of paraphernalia in his room, which I asked his father about, and he said, I just thought he was going through a phase. And the follow-up there was, of course, a Nazi phase.
Yeah.
So that's what Scott's referring to. But tell me a little bit about that, because I know you were listening to that podcast at the time, thinking like, oh God.
So I get hit up, and they're like, because the Southern Poverty Law Center had already done a podcast called Sounds Like Hate, and they had somebody that had infiltrated that recorded everything, and it was comical to me because the first recording they played at Southern Poverty Law Center was me. But I hadn't come out yet, It's my voice on a call being recorded. And then somebody calls me and says, hey, check out White Hot Hate. So I listened to all your podcasts. And when I was listening to the one in my office of Tom talking and telling you what he was telling you, I talk. I'm in my room by myself going, that lying, you lie. You're lying. You're so full of it, man. I knew something was wrong with him. Really. You came down and drank with us. I heard you use the N-word. Apple don't fall far from the tree, I thought it was a phase. Nah.
How do you, when you're you spent 7 months, in and out of their group, how do you, and I know you have a 20-year plus history of going undercover, but how do you always maintain your cover? I mean, it must be hard when you're faced with such hate and such racism and violence. I mean, how do you ever, I would be terrible. My eyes would be rolling all the time. I'd be cringy. I mean, I can't hide my emotions on my face. Obviously, you're trained, but how do you, on this group in particular, because I don't want to take us too far off course, but I know you spent 18 months with the Outlaws too, and that was a very different case insofar as you kind of bonded with some of the guys. I mean, there were a couple guys there that you actually liked. You didn't like any of these guys. I mean, there was
Not
no
really.
commonality. So how do you maintain that?
I mean, I'm an investigator, right? I know the laws. You have to know the laws. I know that what they're saying is atrocious, and it would turn people's stomach, but it's protected under the First Amendment. Are you going to go do something bad? You know? I did bust some of them's chops, though, because it did get stupid sometimes. So maybe that's just me having a little bit of fun, I guess. But because when you start talking about Hollow Earth and that Hitler's still alive, he's in Hollow Earth with the Agarthans, which are giants, and they're coming back, and I go, really? In the middle of the earth? And they're like, yeah, and I go, and they're coming back. They go, yeah, and I go, when? I mean, we're wanting to accelerate this thing, give them a shout. You know, come on. I did also bust their chops on the one where everybody's talking about, we're neo-Nazis. We want it to be just like it was in Germany under Hitler. And then after 5 hours of hiking up and down a mountain with rucksacks on, I'm like, I got one question. So when we do finally get this thing and we accelerate it and we've got our ethno-state, which one of us is going to be Hitler? They hadn't thought about who was going to be the leader, you know? I just let it marinate for a little while. Let's hike some more.
You just mentioned that in your job you know the law, and that obviously helps guide you always. I had asked earlier about that question of entrapment versus being an investigator, and of course I've covered high-profile cases where undercovers have gone over the line.
Yep.
Cases have been thrown out for that. You've never had a case thrown out. In fact, you've never in your years had to testify, which is how you could stay undercover, which is kind of a badge of honor considering everyone pled out on your cases because the evidence was there. But where is that line, and is it sometimes a bit blurry? I mean, have you ever gone close to stepping over the other side?
No, because we do tons of training, and if you're doing this stuff, you should get the training and you should know. But I know they're having a panel on this tomorrow, and Mubin is going to be doing it. I may not be able to make it to that one, but just for the synopsis of, or just your question of entrapment, when you go undercover, it's such a great technique, and you're collecting all this evidence. If it goes to trial, the defense can only really do two things. They can claim entrapment, or they can try to make you look like a piece of trash on the stand. Oh, Special Agent Payne, I couldn't help but notice over those 2 years how many Jack and Cokes you turned back on the camera. I go, yeah, well, did you see it when they gave me too much and I knew I was still going to 7:30? I went in the bathroom and poured it out. So there's stuff like that. They'll try to attack you personally to create doubt, and they try to go with entrapment. But the big thing is the person has to be predicated, If I show up to the Klan rally with a noose and a minority and I go, hey, what do you think we should do with this guy? Yeah, there's going to be entrapment, But basically we mirror. I mirror what you're doing. The base, I'm a tactical guy, but I wasn't going to go in there and use tactical language. But a 19-year-old kid led the carbine training, and I was the head tactical instructor in Knoxville. 19-year-old kid leads carbine training, and it was good. It wasn't the best. There were some mistakes, but it was good. So I had to let them tell me, this is slicing the pie. I'm sorry, what'd you call that? Slicing the pie. Okay, so now I'm slicing. I would use that. But yeah, it's...
But you raise a good point there, and I've heard you say this before, that once you did get on the inside, everything from the whatever wand it was that you now have at your office, to some of the tactical gear they had, to the ghost guns that later came into the case.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about how equipped this group was? And
Yeah.
I think that shocked you when we talked about it previously.
It did, because I showed up and I saw everybody's wanting to build their kit for the Boogaloo. And by kit, it means plate carriers, magazine holders, more magazines, more bullets, rifles.
And maybe just explain, I think most people here would know the Boogaloo, but maybe just explain
Oh, I'm
what
sorry.
that is too.
Well, there's there's technically two. The Boogaloo really, it came out in the militia movement, which militia is not white supremacy. It's militia extremism, it's different. But as far as the Boogaloo goes for white supremacy accelerationists, it's just the apocalypse. It's the end. It's everything, the society has now collapsed. We're ready for the Boogaloo, which is going to be towns are being burnt down, police are being defunded, everything is getting weaker, everything is getting burnt. Now we're going to come in and clean it up. So
they were preparing for the Boogaloo. Back to the question of how well equipped they were. Like that was, yeah.
So I got down there, and we're out on this 100-acre farm, and I'm looking at some of their gear, and I'm letting them tell me what to order. You know, legitimately, I could have taken the stuff off of my FBI kit, take off the patches, and just worn it because they had the same stuff. They had JPC, Cry plate carriers. It's top of the line. It's what our SWAT team wears. But these kids don't have cars. They don't have a job. They do odd jobs, get money from their parents, and they stock up. And they stock up. Luke hated working, but he would work and get a couple of $100 together and buy something, and then he would go sell something on Arms List or whatever. But yeah, I was shocked at, it surprised me how much gear they had, yet they didn't have a car. They put everything into building their kit for the Boogaloo.
And this is the Canadian in me asking the question, but is all that readily available in terms of building it?
Yep. You can go online and get about anything.
And is there anything that you would suggest in terms of that could, any checks or balances? That's a whole other topic.
This is a rabbit hole we could go down.
Okay.
Yeah. As far as firearms and what can work in my mind and what can't, I will say this, and I told you this. I said earlier, to me, everything starts at home. But also, the horrific events of Buffalo, all the active shooter events, they're all horrific. But, and maybe it's the cop in me, the good cop, you know, community-oriented policing cop, or just knowing people over my 28-year career. You have to take away the opportunity. I'm not saying ban all guns. I'm saying if there's a cop on the corner where bad things have been happening, maybe that's enough to take away the opportunity for somebody. I heard him say metal detectors at a church. It's sad you got to do it, but you're taking away the opportunity of somebody bringing a weapon into the church. If you take away the opportunity, then they can't do it. And a simple thing I said is when I was a cop, I used to work a side job, and it was called Frankie's Fun Park. It's basically batting cages, go-karts, and a bunch of video games and stuff like that. And the people that brought me in for the side job taught me, the older cops, they're like, look, if you see kids congregating in these corners, go over there and bust them up. And I said, why? They go, because they're up to no good. And I went, oh. So you go over, hey, what are you kids doing? And they're all sneaking, and they get ready to do something nefarious. But you say, hey, why don't you go play some video games? You just took away the opportunity. I'm not saying it has to be harsh. It's just little things. So
we got to get back to
I know, that's my tangent.
We got to get back
that's
to
my
the
tangent.
base.
Go ahead.
The lefty
I'm
liberal
preaching.
Canadian in me has got goosebumps now, but we'll go back to that topic after.
I know, right? Guns? What is this?
This is kind of a fun friendship that we have here. I'm helping Scott write his book, and Scott interviewed a bunch of writers along with his wife before settling on me, and I laughed the first call. I said, so you thought of it like you're 6'4", 260, Baptist, Republican from the South, and you thought, who's going to embody my voice? Atheist, Canadian, liberal, journalist.
This is what we need. Come together.
This is actually our action item, I think, at the end.
Yeah, right?
That's right.
It can start with something as simple as, do you like music? Me too.
That's right. I am
like drinking?
learning a lot about country music, that's true, and Jack Daniels. I want to get back to the case of the base, and I hope you'll forgive me for telling, sort of just teeing Scott up to tell kind of his war stories of On the Inside, but it is, I mean, this is what Paul wrote about in the Rolling Stone magazine article, because it really is hard to kind of fathom the work that you do. You mentioned the Halloween night.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe that's a story you could just tell us about, because that's about halfway through the case at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by this point, you've met a lot. So you haven't met the leader, but you've been on the phone with him.
Mm-hmm.
You've got TMB, who's Luke Lane. You've got Pestilence, who's Jacob Catterley. You're quote-unquote part of the Georgia cell. Tell me about how many members are at this crazy night, Halloween 2019.
So the Halloween thing ended up being maybe like 13, 14 people. It got all kinds of social media, because the thing that the base would do, and I've seen other accelerationist groups do it, is you got the propaganda. You got to have the video. And every video has to be better than the last video. This recruiting video has to be way better than the last one. So there's a pretty strong video of the Halloween one, and it's all of us and fight training, and like I'm in a bunch of it. But we get there, Halloween, the temperature drops considerably, like considerably. It went from like 60 to 20, and I was like, I got to go to Walmart and get me some Long Johns, man. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to make it tonight. So they start talking about doing different stuff and training, and then I fell asleep in the truck for a little bit because I was recharging my phone, and I'm woken up to one of the guys, what the heck was his name? I know his real name,
Eisen?
Jamel. No, it wasn't Eisen. It's the kid from, I don't know, the kid from Austin. Zoomnat. Oh, see, I purposely put him out of my mind because I dislike him that much.
These online names that they
But I mean, what's not to like about a guy who worked third shift, got in a car, and drove to North Georgia from Austin, never sleeping, never stopping, except for the time in Alabama he fell asleep and rear-ended somebody because he's on Adderall, and then he shows up and is fun to be around. So I'm woken up by him beating on the door. Pale horse, you got to get up, you got to get up. And I'm like, what's going on? They're like, you ain't going to believe it, man, we got to go. And I'm like, we got to go? Oh, man. So.
And Pale Horse is your name, how they know
I
you.
know, right. Pale Horse is
Okay.
me, yeah. At Eater of Souls, woo. You got to blend in. So I get out, and sure enough, they have a goat. And it's in the back of Can't Go Back's truck, and it's just crapping everywhere. And the guy says, one of the big dudes, he's like, this thing's crapping everywhere. I said, I'd be crapping too if a bunch of Neanderthals dressed in Flecktarn camo with hoods jerked me out of my yard, So.
And not to embarrass you, but I remember you telling me, like, you were feeling really bad for the goat.
Oh, I did. I felt bad for the goat. I mean, if I got to go kill something to feed my family, I will, but otherwise I can go to the store. It's a little cheaper. Well, maybe not right now. Maybe it is cheaper to go kill something right now. But
you went back to your truck and telling your team.
I went back to my truck because I'm like, I'm watching Eisen, and Eisen is going to run the blot, a pagan ritual. Again, not illegal. I've got friends that are pagans, and they're some of the nicest people you can meet. Not pagan motorcycle club, pagan belief system. So he's telling me, like, I actually tell Eisen, I go, is it bad? And you can hear it on the recording. I go, is it bad that I feel sorry for the goat? And he's like, don't let anybody hear you say that. Don't let the goat hear you say that. This goat, we're showing this goat love. This goat is being sacrificed to Odin, and we're gonna get credit in Valhalla. This goat is happy because it's going to Valhalla, and I'm like, I don't think the goat's too damn happy. But I'm trying to think in my mind, is there anything that I should stop this for? But in my mind, as an undercover coordinator, a senior case agent, I'm going through every, multitude of legal leads we've got at the FBI, which is a ton. And I'm going, I don't see anything. So I go over, and in my transmitter device to the team, I'm like leaning in the back of my truck, and I'm like, hey, if y'all can hear me, it looks like we're getting ready to go kill this animal and sacrifice it. And I go, I can't think of anything like, federally, it's not an armed robbery. The argument could be made, if you kill it and then you eat it, did we really torture it? No, so I said, but if you guys got anything, please just give me a sign. And it was just crickets. And I went, well, I guess we're going down in the woods. So we go down in the woods, and oh man, these guys. We go down in the woods, and we're at the ceremonial spot, and they've got the goat, and this is a little brutal and horrific, and I apologize, but it's true. So Eisen has this big, not a machete, but more like in between a machete and a sword. So he does this whole spiel about the wild hunt, where he's taking the story of the wild hunt in Norse mythology, and he's turning it to the wild hunt is going to be us. We're making this sacrifice to start the wild hunt, which is us starting to cleanse the world of any mud race, anything non-white. Which, by the way, half of them wouldn't pass 23andMe. They're all mixed too. They don't, there's, you know, whatever. You're not a Viking, kid. But I'm pretty sure. If you were, you're not going to make it too long. So we're holding the goat. He does this whole spiel to Odin and the great wild hunt. And then I'm at the back of the goat, and he's got this big blade, and he starts towards the back of his neck. Time just slows down. And finally, I'm like, just do it, man. Just do it. He comes down real hard, and all you hear is thump. Turns out the back strap on the goat is so daggum thick, and the double coat hair, it didn't even make it bleed. And you hear, bah, and I went, oh man, this is gonna turn bad. It's gonna turn bad. Well, Pestilence says, hey, does anybody have a gun? I should preface that with, we all said, leave your guns back at the barn for a reason. The crazy kid who hasn't slept in 72 hours goes, I got my gun, which by the way is the worst shooter out of the group. And I'm like, and me and Luke Lane both said, well, you've got a gun? So we get the gun, we hand it to Eisen so he can sacrifice the goat, you know, properly. We're in a circle around the goat. Eisen points at the goat and turns his head away. And I said, whoa, 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 whoa. He's like, what? And I go, look at what you're shooting at, man. We're in a circle, you know? And he's like, oh. I mean, it's a shame you got to be a firearms instructor at the time of a sacrifice, but it came out. Safety first. So he's like, oh, yeah, yeah. So he points, boom. You can hear, even on the recording, you can hear the goat hit the ground. All right, yeah, we're going to Valhalla, blah, blah, blah. And it's still kicking after like a minute or two. Oh. And I'm like, go ahead and put another bullet in it. He goes, well, I think he's dead. I said, I thought we were supposed to show love to this goat. This goat should show up happy to Odin, right? Put another bullet in it. And when he did, it died. And then they commenced to slicing his throat, filling it wasn't like a chalice, but it was something. It was a big cup full of blood, and they start passing it around to drink as part of the sacrifice. And just on previous blots, I've had to cut myself, bleed on runes. It's just all kinds of stuff. Very Viking. But as the cup gets to me, it's already clotting. So it looks like egg yolks and stuff, and it's like really chunky. And I'm like, no, I'm not drinking that. But I'll participate. I'll put my finger all the way down in it, sucked it off my finger, nice bloody taste, chased it with a beer, and then Eisen started handing out acid to everybody. And I'm like, cool. So I held the flashlight so he could see to tear the tabs off everybody. But you got to remember, some of these are young kids, and you might think, man, they're stupid. But some of them are actually pretty brilliant. I mean, the OPSEC these people put together on just to go stick up stickers on a street post is strong.
I know, that was going to be my next question, that it's so easy to talk about terrorism's theater of the absurd, and these stories are just ridiculous. But obviously, this group was planning some pretty horrific acts.
Yes.
And, you know, a night like that is, I'm sure, like a story to tell. I can't imagine when you come home and how was your day at work, honey, what comes out. But in terms of what then, like, take us through the last couple months, or the last bust, really, what happened and how close they came to carrying out.
So we had heard some scuttlebutt, but you have to go back and listen to the recording, because you're like, what was he saying over here? Because it's like multiple people talking at a time. And you're like, I'm not really sure. Are they talking about that they've had some targets, but targets for what? We're just going to go up and stand on the porch fully kitted, take a picture, because that was done for intimidation and stuff. Ended up being the wrong person's house. The intimidation worked for the people living there. It's right. Just that they weren't the right people. So we're trying to figure it out. And going back, and it's just like, oh, is it just flyering? Again, are you people really trying to do something bad? Or is it just First Amendment protected and you're just spewing crap? But by Halloween weekend, by the end of it, it was just me, Caterly, and Luke sitting by the fire. And pretty much everybody had left. And I started kind of bringing it up you got to do it where it's not suspicious. It's a whole dog. I mean, it's a whole cat and mouse game, right? And master a puppet. You're trying to not look suspicious, but try to get the information we need, and waiting for the right time to strike. So he said, "Yeah, man, let's put our phones on airplane mode." Cool. We go over there and stick them on airplane mode, which I didn't. Hey, you know, we want the team to hear everything, right? So that's when they started telling me that they did have targets and they were planning on doing something. Still didn't know what yet, but I'd gained enough trust by that time that they were starting to include me on stuff. And as the months went on, we get some encrypted. There's two things going on. The Delaware-Baltimore crew are really ramping up about the guns rights rally in Virginia.
So I'll just back you up for one moment. So we know about the Georgia group, which is Luke Lane, Catterley, and
Helter Skelter.
Helter Skelter. His real name is
Helter Brand.
And then there's a separate group, which was part of the subject of the podcast that I did, which involved this Canadian Armed Forces reservist who was actually outed by this journalist and then fled to the States.
Yep.
And he was
illegally.
And he had been with the Georgia crew, and then it's a very long story, but they all started fighting with each other. These guys in Georgia wanted to then kill this Canadian. They go up to Delaware, and he's with an Iraqi armed veteran.
Yeah, Bill Brook. No, Bill Limley. Limley was former Army.
And so, tell us first what they were planning up in Delaware. Those two. So
well, in the main chat, you know, and of course, anybody starts talking dirty in the main chat, they're like, take it to DM, take it to a side porch, you know. So that way, it's just two people having a conversation, not the whole everybody seeing it. So they had been blasting that this Guns Right rally may be the Boogaloo. This may be the chance to start the Boogaloo. There's going to be all kinds of armed militia people there, not white supremacists, but the idea was to go down there as accelerationists, blend in with the militia people, and start popping some rounds, because then in their mind, the cops will start shooting the militia people will start shooting back, and then they can come in and clean up.
And this was in Virginia, the Second Amendment rally.
Yeah, in Virginia. And that was kind of a time frame. That kind of started the clock for us, because we knew when the rally was going to be. And it ebbed and flowed, and the Baltimore team, unbelievable case agent, boss, assistant United States attorney, unbelievable. A matter of fact, if it wasn't for those two, I mean, there's some great people on this case. It was ran out of Seattle, but if it wasn't for those two, we wouldn't have got a lot of stuff done. So they do a wire and have a camera installed to watch the apartment with Pat Matthews and Brian Limley. And you get to see them just hating. You get to see them making recordings with Canadian gas mask on, yelling and screaming, and you want to treat me like a terrorist, I'll be a terrorist. We're going to go out here and burn this down and all this stuff. So they're working on that. So we're trying to cover that. But I also, in Georgia, we get this encrypted message within the Georgia Cell channel. And it's like, hey, come down, bring all this. Basically, what it laid out was exactly what you would need to go do flyering or stickering. Change of clothes, park far away, don't let cameras see you, walk as far as you're going to go, then start stickering on the way back, dump your clothes. I mean, they did everything, and it's all written out. So it was everything with that, except it said bring your guns. So me and the case teams are like, we're talking at 10:30 at night, 12:30 in the morning. I'm like, is they planning on killing somebody? I mean, that just doesn't sound right. After being with these guys, and I tried to get him to tell me on the phone through wire, and he wouldn't. I talked to him on a Monday, I got nothing but giggles. I talked to him on a Thursday, I got nothing but giggles. And he said, well, if you come down here, I'll tell you. I said, I'll be there tomorrow. So I drove down and I met Luke face to face at about 1:30 or so, after I woke him up. And he doesn't work third shift, by the way. So I'm like, morning sunshine. You know, he comes out and we're at the barn and we take our phones, put them on airplane mode and put them in a cooler, walk over, and I say something to the effect of, all right, you know I like to joke, you know I like to have a good time, but when it's time to do something serious, I'm serious. I said, so what are we doing? Because I've been asking him, do I need to bring a different car? Do I need to bring something that doesn't tie back to me? He would never answer. So when I said, what are we doing? What's up? He says, essentially, we're going to whack some people. And I said, well, that's way different than putting up stickers, you know? And I said, and it's definitely nothing you would want to drive your own truck to. Like, what's wrong with you? So we sit down, and I've been told if it is going to be something like a murder, we've got to slow this thing down. So I talk to him, and I let him I show him that he has done nothing OPSEC-wise to prepare for this murder of this Antifa couple in a neighboring town, where he did so much OPSEC just to do.
It was odd, for putting up
Yeah.
flyers.
So I asked him, I'm like, what's the haste? Why are you? And he goes, I'm just tired of waiting. I said, well, let's do. I mean, again, set yourself up for success, man. What do you? I mean, I'm with you, but this doesn't make any sense. You ain't even seen the place. We don't know if there's kids there. We don't know if they got dogs. What is your plan? So over the next several weeks, the plan was put together. I drove them out there. We did everybody in the cell group did a surveillance out there to look at the house, talk about it.
And this is also, I mean, in addition to obviously slowing it down, which you have to, you're also just gathering evidence now,
Yes.
right? Like this is all on why.
Mm-hmm.
I remember covering the sentencing hearing. A lot of this stuff came out,
Yeah.
the exact quotes that they were saying,
Yeah, they.
including the one, I can't remember if it was Lemney, who said about the children.
That was Helterbrand. When we took Helterbrand and we rode out there, and on the ride out, Helterbrand was just supposed to be in the car to drop us off to go in to do the murders. And listen, these guys, again, kids, yeah, to my age, yes, but go to a campsite, leave our cell phones there, that's your alibi. Somebody wants to know where you were, we were at the campsite. But we leave the campsite, we pay cash for some rundown, pay-by-the-hour hotel. We go in there, we scrub our skin so we don't leave any flakes. These are all their ideas. They even said if you've never killed anybody, they heard that you can lose your bowel functions, so maybe get an adult diaper. I said, I think I'll be okay. You can wear the diaper, I'm all right. But putting gloves on, just like hazmat, hazardous material, tape everything up so you don't leave any DNA.
So they were really serious.
Yeah, serious. Going in, they had already they had a .22 caliber, put a solvent trap on it for a silencer, and that's what they were planning on killing them with. However, we would be going in with our ARs if the crap hit the fan, and they had ordered catch bags. And what that does is the catch bag clamps onto your AR so that when you're shooting, the brass gets caught in the bag and it doesn't drop to leave evidence.
And just back to the comment in the car that
Yes.
he said with the...
Yeah, we're on the ride out there, and Helterbrand says, if you don't mind, Pale, I'd like to pop my cherry on this one. And I went, huh? What are you talking about? He said, well, I actually want to put a bullet in one of them's head. And I said, well, that should be doable. It's a .22 revolver,
Yeah.
doesn't leave any brass. I said, yeah, that should be fine. So when we get back, we're talking about it. We're out there standing freezing cold, and he said, hey, something about, I don't know if there's any kids in there. And Helterbrand says, I have no problem shooting a commie kid. So,
Just really chilling language, and the hate, yeah. When you hear it all verbatim like that because of all the, ample evidence that you had recorded, it was pretty shocking in court.
Yeah.
Sadly, I knew this would happen. We have 7 minutes left. So I just want to, for those who don't know the end of the story, obviously it's a happy ending to the fact that you stopped this. But there must, just tell me just very quickly about that tension that there must be in terms of timing. Like all that evidence that you got allowed the cases, everybody pled out. They got pretty big sentences for domestic terrorism cases anyway. Where's that line where I'm sure you had people in the FBI being like, we got to move. We have one misstep, and
Yes.
these guys are armed and ready to go.
24-hour surveillance, because what if they decide to go kill this couple without me involved?
Right.
So you've got all that going. We're getting down to crunch time. I flew from Knoxville to Baltimore, met the case team, drove up to Delaware the next morning, spent the entire day shooting and sighting in weapons. Again, Lemley did have a job. He drove a truck for a company, but he had a brand new Chevy SR2, nice diesel, small, mid-sized truck. He had a 6.5 Creedmoor rifle with a $6,000 thermal scope. They picked up on the wire that they had planned on, look, we can see a cop doing a car stop. It's a thermal scope. We got the drop at night in the dark, kill the cop, go up, take all the gear out of the car to help us build up our kit for the Boogaloo. All kinds of stuff like that. So I helped them sight in their weapons, the ghost gun that they had built. And then we went back to the apartment and started drinking. And, divine intervention is what I believe, but I was able to get everything that the team wanted. At one point, it was going so good, I actually found the pinhole camera in the wall, and I knew they were over there watching, but I found it because I know what to look for. But I actually looked at it, and as I was drinking, I went and winked because I was like, we got everything, right? So I finish up with them, drive back late, get to the airport. I get super delayed because in North Georgia, they're waiting on me. And they don't know that I've just been in Virginia where they want to go up and kill Pat because Pat knows too much about the murder plots. And so we get down, I fly to Atlanta, no rental car for me. I finally find a rental car, haul tail up, and that's when I meet Helterbrand. And we did the deal we just talked about. I go home for one day. I come back to help vet a new member face-to-face. I met a local SWAT team that was going to be doing the hit. Tuesday night, I stayed in Rome, wake up Tuesday, meet the SWAT team again to go over how the takedown's going to go. I pick up Lane. I'd already ensured that he wouldn't have a gun with him. We drive out because the big deal is on a 100-acre farm, you're not going to be able to sneak up on anybody, right? So I said, well, why don't I just get him off the farm, away from his arsenal, and y'all can take us down in the truck. So that's what they did. So on that Wednesday, they arrested Luke. They later arrested Jacob Caterly and Helterbrand as he was leaving work, because Helterbrand was actually an IT guy, and he claimed that he was the perfect cover because he just looks like a normal person working IT. So when he goes out and kills somebody, it's not going to be a big, nobody's going to think it's him. We took them off, kept it very quiet. Thursday morning, 6 a.m.-ish, Washington field office SWAT team hits Eisen. Baltimore SWAT team hits Limley and Matthews. And then now it starts coming out. It's Thursday, the affidavits are starting to come out, and it's being thrown all over the wire channel in the base. They're like, it says there's a Fed in here, and there's a first meeting in July, and I'm just watching. I'm not saying nothing. They're like, Pale Horse, you there? I'm not answering. And I make it to Friday at about 5:15 or 5:30 when Nazaro comes on. He's talking about all this stuff, and he basically says, I don't know what we could have done, because people are like, you can't smell a Fed, you could do this. Hey, 30-year-old person, blah, blah. Nazaro comes on and says, I don't know what else we could have done to identify this guy. He was one of our best members. He said, the only thing I can say is maybe just don't do anything illegal. He said, because this guy passed every test and he was that good. And then it said, you've been removed by Roman. And that's why I screenshotted it and sent it to everybody that was on every team throughout the FBI and go, and I'm done.
You're out.
So yeah.
And essentially the base is no more. Certainly the
Correct.
movement isn't dead, but where, I'll ask the biggest question right at the end when you have 2 minutes. But what are you looking for now? I know you've since retired.
Mm-hmm.
What are you watching for in terms of this movement, though?
So I can't say that I'm keeping my thumb on the pulse because I'm not at the office anymore. But I come to these types of events. I try to learn as much as I can. I try to spread knowledge and try to pay it forward. And on top of all of that, do the right thing. You know, I teach cops. I'm like, don't tarnish the badge and do the right thing. You don't have to enjoy doing the right thing. Sometimes I'd much rather punch somebody in the throat than do the right thing. But I do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. So I go out and I teach on white nationalism, undercover stressors, biker stuff, murder for hires, all that stuff. Well, you know it because you're helping write the book. But I just try to pay it forward. I would imagine if I was, guys and gals that are out here, ADL, Southern Poverty Law Center, all these great organizations, they're staying on top of it. And I can always speak to what I learned or help is all.
And you had said to me once before that obviously, white supremacy has been around for years and years and years and decades, but the accelerationist movement is new, and that's what you think. By the time you had retired,
yep. Close to it. The last year before I retired, I had a very, very well-placed source that had been in the movements forever and ever, and I was actually grooming him to be able to do, I didn't know anything about formers, but I was grooming him to kind of do that when I retired, because he wanted out, and I was like, dude, you would not be the first source to go explain what you've learned to law enforcement or whatnot, analyst, but he had an unfortunate accident with a gun being stupid with alcohol infused, and he is no longer with us. But he said that 2 years prior to that, as I said earlier, accelerationists were fringe. It was 1 or 2, maybe 3 groups, especially in the States. He said at the time when we were getting towards the end of my career, in a 2-year period, he said, I guarantee you that 90% of the white nationalists that are on these dark web platforms are accelerationists. And if you scratch far enough down on an accelerationist group, you're most likely going to find a member of the Order of Nine Angles, which is a completely satanic supremacy group. So, fueling that hate.
Look at that time, 6 seconds over. We've never had a conversation that's been on time before, so I'd like to congratulate both of us.
You lead me.
I really want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you for the work that you've done for so many years. I'm sure everybody out there has way more questions, but he's very visible, so you can find him. And thank you.
Cocktail hour.
And he's very good with Jack Daniels. Thank you very much, Scott, for doing this.
Thank you, and thank you all for what you're doing. Thank you.